Welcome everyone to the Financial Freedom for Faith Leaders in a Fragile Economy webinar. My name is Guy Rust and I serve as the Vice President of Innovation and Data at Church Mutual Insurance Company. And we're very happy to be one of the sponsors for the webinar today. I also will be serving as the facilitator for today's webinar. And as part of that role, I have the distinct pleasure to introduce Dr. Michael Long from he serves as the Director of Spiritual Formation at Duke Divinity School, which is the other sponsor of today's webinar. Dr. Long, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Guy. Good afternoon, and thank you for your virtual presence with us today. I'm delighted to express words of greeting, hospitality, and welcome on behalf of our Dean Eduardo Colon Emmerich, Dr. David Goatley, Associate Dean for Academic and Vocational Formation, who also serves as the Director of the Office of Black Church Studies, Reverend Regina Graham, Associate Director of the Office of Black Church Studies, and our entire Duke Divinity School community. Welcome to the seminar, designed to guide our discussion and provide practical direction for meeting the challenge of financial freedom in a fragile economy. Faith leaders from all faith traditions are called upon to empower persons to thrive in all circumstances. This task is engaged by the active demonstration of faith by leaders, connection with vital streams of relevant information, and access to persons with knowledge and expertise. We have all of these elements present in our webinar today. I welcome Dr. DeForest Soares, Mr. Rich Portier, and all team members that provide support for the success of this virtual gathering. Without question, the economic landscape of our country has changed dramatically over the past few years. The Office of Black Church Studies is leading the way by hosting opportunities, such as this webinar, to discuss the challenges facing our faith communities. The Office of Black Church Studies is marking its 50th anniversary during this 2022-2023 academic year, with significant history of leading change in church communities through events, lectures, and experiences. The mission and future work of this office shines even brighter. Welcome, and thank you for your connection with Duke Divinity School, the Office of Black Church Studies, and this virtual space for sharing information, discussion, reflection, and engagement.
Thank you, Dr. Long. We're very happy to have you here, and thank you again to Duke Divinity School for your sponsorship of this webinar. Now I get the distinct privilege and honor to introduce the President and CEO of Church Mutual, Rich Portier. Rich, I'll turn it over to you for remarks.
Helps when we're not on mute. There are times to be quiet in church, and then there are times you need to speak up. So first and foremost, what an honor to partner with an institution like Duke. We are just so honored and pleased to be part of today's seminar. On behalf of Church Mutual, welcome to the Financial Freedom. We're so glad you are all here with us today. We started providing these webinars in light of the pandemic, and then it grew into something much bigger. We led with the topic of mental health and have since branched off to include topics like physical fitness, finances, and the like. You all occupy positions of spiritual influence, and we want to help you care for the different aspects of your lives so you can better serve those who depend on you. We are thankful to partner with so many of you in protecting the greater good and evaluating the human condition. These webinars are just one small way to thank you and help you in your work to care for and support those in your community. When Church Mutual was founded 125 years ago, we were founded to fit a need. We would have thought webinars would be a very great way to express our gratitude and offer practical support 125 years later. By being here, you're prioritizing the financial health of your organization, your ministry. It's a daunting task in today's fragile economy, but something you must proactively plan for rather than passively hoping for the best. So on behalf of Church Mutual and our presenters, a heartfelt thank you for joining us. Thank you, Guy.
Thanks, Rich, and thanks again to Dr. Long. A few housekeeping items before we get running here. So I'm going to give a short introduction for our speaker today, and then I'm going to turn it over to him for a set of opening remarks. And after those remarks, we're going to move into a question and answer session to address your most pressing concerns on this topic. With Zoom, you should have a Zoom bar either at the bottom or the top of your window, and you'll see in that bar an icon that says Q&A. Please use that function to enter your question or comment at any point in time during the session today. Our speaker is very anxious to answer your questions and know exactly what's on your mind and how he can help. So please do that at any point, and we'll address those questions then as we go. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome the Reverend Dr. DeForest Soares. Dr. Soares is a very storied and influential individual. He's launched the D-Free Financial Freedom Movement, and which include authoring 2 books, one by the title of Say Yes to No Debt, 12 Steps to Financial Freedom, and Meditations for Financial Freedom, Volumes 1 and 2. But perhaps most significant for the conversation today, Dr. Soares has served and does serve in a role that I'm guessing many of you who are joining today do as well. And so he can provide very personal information as well from his role as the senior pastor of First Baptist Church of Lincoln Gardens in Somerset, New Jersey. Dr. Soares, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Guy. And thanks to Duke Divinity School for this invitation to participate in this very important opportunity. And thanks to Church Mutual for extending itself and its resources to make not only this, but other kinds of sessions to enhance ministry as possible as they have. I started at First Baptist Church of Lincoln Gardens in November of 1990. And when I arrived there, the weekly income was $4,000 on a good Sunday. We had about 800 active members. And by the time I retired in July of 2021, we had about 7,000 active members and $100,000 a week in income. What I want to share with you today has much more to do with what I learned through that process, because during those years, as all of you know, we had a global economic meltdown around 2007, 2008, where mortgages were being foreclosed, houses were being taken, jobs were being lost, and that recession lasted for about 6 years. And then, of course, most recently, we had a global pandemic that was a challenge in every way, not the least of which being the inability to gather. And in our tradition, if we weren't successful in getting offerings on Sunday when people were there, we probably would never get them at all. Yet, despite the pandemic that's most recent, and despite the economic meltdown of some years ago, the church was able to prosper financially. And I'm simply here as an expert on my own experience. I am not an expert on your experience. No 2 experiences are exactly alike. But I did think about some of the principles that drove our work and the assumptions we made through these years that allowed for not only financial growth, but spiritual growth and numerical growth during these years of my tenure at First Baptist. And so understand that my experience is not yours, but my principles might be able to help. And of course, the assumption coming into ministry is that the resources that are available to access come from the members themselves. Now, at the end of this presentation, I hope I have time to talk about supplementary income, ways we develop income to support ministry that was related to the church, but not central to the church outside of parishioner giving. But I'll focus mostly on the focus that we had on our members. And so coming into First Baptist that had a building fund, we were trying to construct a new facility. There were three realities that I faced as it related to giving. And that was, number one, there were people who came to church on a regular basis who participated in our activities, and they were what we would call regular givers. They would give at least twice a month. They would attend worship at least twice a month. And so we needed a strategy to sustain and grow their giving. Then there was category number two, the people who loved the church, who participated in activities and didn't give a dime. I have a friend whose church is much larger than ours. And at the point of my significant discouragement, and if you've ever been discouraged, just know there's at least one other leader of a congregation that has been discouraged. But my friend told me that 80% of the active participants in his church did not support the church financially. And that 20% of the participants actually covered 100% of the financial responsibilities. And so the challenge for category number two is how can we get people who don't give anything to give something? And then category number three, of course, is new givers. If the people who do give as much as they can, the people who don't give start giving something, how can we add to the number of givers to expand the church's financial capacity? And that was my assumption coming in to my pastorate at First Baptist, and that led my work through the financially challenging times that we had. And so here is the major overriding view that I have and that I had. It's informed my writing, it's informed my prayers, it's informed my preaching, and that is this. In spite of the needs that the institution may have, in spite of the fact that in 2003, we marched into a new worship facility that cost $23 million. We were $19 million in debt. We had construction cost overruns and all kinds of problems building the facility. And our mortgage was $135,000 every month. At that time, our income was about $65,000 a week. And when I met with my trustees in 2005, and they were describing to me the fiscal challenges we were having, I felt like perhaps I should resign. One of my books really describes this experience in full. But I came back to the board and I said to my board, I know we're kind of robbing Peter to pay Paul. I know that we don't have enough monthly income to meet our monthly expenses. I understand the stress on the people who write the checks and the people that have to talk to our creditors. But I believe that what God has called me to do is to put the needs of the people over the needs of the institution. And specifically at that time, I focused on the needs of the people as it related to debt. And what I said to my trustees was that if we help our people get out of debt, then our people will be in a position to help our church get out of debt. And so putting the needs of the people over the needs of the institution, making their financial stresses our institutional priority. It meant helping people get control of the money that they have. It meant as a ministry, as a congregation, as an institution, structuring programs that would help people increase their income so that they can improve their lives. And then, of course, it also included teaching people how to enjoy giving, getting control of the money that they have, which in some instances was as simple as breaking the addiction to Starbucks coffee, which on a weekly basis could cost $25. It sometimes meant going from 859 TV stations on premium cable to 30 or 40 stations on basic cable and saving the money. It meant taking the money that we currently have and redesigning the way we spend that money. In our financial ministry, we called it paying as you go, avoiding high interest credit cards and debt to support lifestyles we can't afford. It meant paying our bills on time and avoiding late fees. And it meant living within our means. We teach people to live on 70% of their income, which means that budgeting and financial literacy and financial management became the priority focus of the church. And what we discovered was that focusing on the needs of the people and serving their financial needs and helping them mitigate their financial stresses. In 1 year, from 2005 to 2006, the income of the church went up by $1 million without having any special offerings, any special programs, and any special fundraising. So, in terms of the people who were already giving and the people who would start giving, and even the new givers, there were three things we came to realize were critical as the church finances grew during financially stressful times. Number one was thanking people. Every Sunday, when I would get up to announce the offering, I would always thank people for their giving. Never one time in 30 years did I beat people up because the church's finances were stressed. Never did I try to use guilt to make people give more money. In fact, another pastor friend of mine called me about 6 months ago and asked me how to address finances with his congregation during COVID. And I said to him what I'm saying to you, why don't you begin by thanking the people for the gifts that they give? Now, in some instances, we actually held receptions. Before COVID, we'd hold receptions and we'd invite people to come to a restaurant. We'd invite people to come to a member's home. We'd invite people to come to a breakfast at the church just to say thank you. And thank you goes a long way. And we found that showing enthusiastic appreciation for the people that already give, it does two things. One, it motivates the people who give to give more. And it also motivates people who are not giving, because when you stand up in front of 1,000 people or 100 people and you thank everyone for giving, the people who are not giving, but who are receiving that thanks, there's a strange kind of spiritual something that happens, because they begin feeling guilty for not for not giving, but they begin feeling guilty for accepting the thanks that really belongs to somebody else. The second way to show enthusiastic appreciation is accountability. Accountability at First Baptist really meant explaining to everyone in the church where every penny in the church went. It became alarming to me as people began joining our church over the years to find that many of them were surprised that we actually gave a financial report to the entire congregation, and that we paused twice a year to answer all of the questions that the congregation had, that we showed them how the church was doing as compared to what the budget was, that we invited a large church like ours with 7,000 members to actually vote on the next year's budget, that we only budgeted to spend in the next year what we had received of the previous year, which allowed the church to always have a surplus. And so accountability, reporting to people and letting them know that we as leaders feel responsible for sharing with them the financial realities of the church. We found that Enthusiastic appreciation included fiscal accountability. And then the third is transparency. Transparency on an individual level. Most of my members are aware of the fact that I was running from credit card collection agencies in my 20s. All of my members have heard me talk about my addiction to neckties, and I had to break that addiction so that I could become more generous. So transparency on a personal level by leaders goes a long way to motivate people to give or to give more or to start giving. Transparency, of course, on an institutional level, we started having under my leadership external audits. And when we had certified public accountants issue audits on our books, it made it so much easier for us to be believed by our members, because any scandal that occurs in any religious institution causes doubt among the participants' minds in every religious institution. So saying thank you, being accountable, and a commitment to transparency is a part of how we, on an ongoing basis, showed great appreciation for the people who gave. Then, as a church that has been teaching tithing for so many years, I made the decision that there were some people who were more inclined to give during this modern age for very specific reasons beyond their love for God and beyond their own spiritual maturity and commitment. And so we began giving people concrete options, especially people who were giving, but really had it to give more. And the three categories for those options were these. Number one, the facility. We, as I told you, built a new church. In new churches, you have the responsibility of paying for the new church. In older churches, or older synagogues, or older mosques, or older nonprofits even. In older buildings, you have the need for upkeep, you have the need for replacing different things. And so facilities, we found, represented a tremendous opportunity for people to give and to increase the giving beyond the normal Sunday morning pass the plate offering. There were people who would give for facilities that would never give for anything else. We had one of our young executives in our church who was a pretty decent giver, gave on a regular basis. He walked up to me and handed me a check for $135,000 to outfit a room in the new building that was obviously built because the building was up, but it needed additional outfitting. It needed equipment and supplies. It was a unique room. And he and his wife decided to write the check for $135,000, although no one would assume by his normal weekly giving that they had that kind of money to give. The second area that we have found people willing to give to above their normal gifts or to begin giving, since they don't have any normal gifts, is specific programs, after school programs, programs for missions. We took up the largest offering we ever received in 30 years to support the victims of Hurricane Katrina. That was money that the people had, that they gave on top of all of their other giving. And we would have never received that kind of offering if that had not occurred. And so specific programs, activities, they could be one time, they could be long-term, but there are people whose hearts are moved to give specific programs that perhaps wouldn't give if that were just a general part of their giving. And then the third is legacy giving. We started an endowment to help people give in a way that would live beyond their own lives, and special giving through trusts, and special giving through bequests, special giving through insurance policies. Those are categories of giving that we call legacy giving. And so facilities and programs and legacy opportunities helped us expand what we otherwise would not have been able to do. Now, again, what's interesting is that when I go back to facilities, if we budgeted to spend $100,000 on a particular room, that's in our operating budget. But then someone comes along and gives $100,000 as a designated gift for that room. What that does, it frees up the $100,000 that we budgeted because we needed the room to be outfitted. That frees up the $100,000 to be used for another activity for which we perhaps would not have been able to raise the money. And so specialized giving for facilities and programs and legacy will not only expand our capacity, but also it frees up sometimes operating funds that can be used in ways that you otherwise would not have access to them. Now, I said at the beginning that I'll talk about ways that we increase revenue, and I'll just run through these quickly and answer any questions if there are any afterwards. I believe my personal philosophy has been to only operate the institution on the revenue derived from the people who give to the institution. Meaning, at my church, we never planned to have activities that were sponsored by people outside of the church. But we did set up 5 nonprofit corporations. And those 5 nonprofit corporations were these. We had 2 affordable housing corporations. We had 1 economic development corporation. We had 1 foster care and adoption agency. And we had a coordinating community development corporation. Those 5 not-for-profit corporations founded and launched by the church enabled the church to expand its capacity to do impact beyond the 4 walls of the building, while at the same time attracting resources beyond the giving of the members of the church. And the 5 categories that we were able to access in terms of increased revenue were these. Number 1, grants. We received grants from foundations, from corporations, and others whose funding interests match the needs of our community and match the interest of our work. The second category is fees for service, fee for service. Our foster care and adoption agency signed a contract with the state of New Jersey, and we were contracted to recruit, train, and retain foster parents, primarily in the inner city, for Black and brown children. That was a corporation started by the church, controlled by the church, but legally and fiscally separate from the church. But it was a concern that the church had for foster care and abandoned children. And so the church's mission was advanced, much like Lutherans do, just much like Catholic Charities does. We were able to expand on the impact of the church and the mission of the church by having a fee-for-service contract that expanded the church's work without costing the church money. The third is through partnerships. We increased revenue through partnership with other organizations and other corporations, and I can talk much more about partnerships if anyone has a question about that. The fourth is sponsorships. There were, in many instances, sponsors, which were corporations, sponsors as individuals that would write a check to have their name, it's kind of a marketing relationship, attached to some activity that we were involved in. In a couple of instances, the church itself received sponsorship support. For instance, during COVID, the only live service that we had was an outdoor drive-in service on Easter of 2021. And to do that, we needed a place, we needed equipment, we needed all kinds of things that the church did not have. And we were able to get 2 corporations to actually sponsor our Easter service outside. We told them what we were doing. We explained the nature of our membership. we described the kind of outreach we would do. And these two corporations paid about 120% of our cost for our outdoor Easter service through sponsorship. And then the final category is development. Our Affordable Housing Corporation was involved in housing development. In one instance, we formed a joint venture with a for-profit developer. In another instance, we did the entire development ourselves, and we were able to pay for the employees, the staff, and all of the development costs through the resources derived through that entity. And so there are ways to increase the revenue for a mission, even though, again, my core philosophy is that the revenue that the entity, the church, the synagogue, the mosque, that the entity itself, those resources should rely as much as possible on the giving of the members and the participants, with the supplementary income coming in ways that the institution does not become so dependent on that if those resources go away, then the institution is incapable of carrying out its core mission. So these are the things I learned in my 30 years and 8 months and 16 hours as pastor of First Baptist Church in Somerset, New Jersey. None of this I learned in seminary. And so I'm really grateful to Duke Divinity School for doing for its constituency what no seminary ever did for me. I've attended and graduated from a couple of seminaries, but we didn't talk business and budgets and finance as much as I probably could have used help with prior to becoming the pastor of this church. So thank you to Duke. Thank you to all of you for taking your time to spend this time with us. And I'm hoping that we can be involved in a robust conversation, and I'll answer as many questions as we have time to answer.
Thank you so much, Dr. Soares. That's a wonderful overview and so many great things in there that we can dive into. We've got a number of questions that have already come in, so we'll dive right into those. The first one really goes back to those 3 core elements you talked about in terms of increasing giving, and kind of focuses on that first one, being very conscious about thanking people. And this question is about the examples you used sounded mostly like the pastor thanking the people or the leader of the congregation thanking people. And the question is, what other officers maybe should be involved in that thanking, or as well as the other 2 actions, the accountability and the transparency?
Yeah, I hope I used the word we more than I, but if I didn't, then I can correct it now. Thank you for that question. In our church, the way the Baptist church is structured, there are 2 groups of lay leaders. You have the deacons and you have the trustees. We also set up a special committee to help us as leaders thank the congregation. And so it was a collective thank you, not just the pastor, but it was a thank you from the leaders of those lay groups and the members of those lay groups, managed and facilitated by a special committee that did the work. Sometimes pastors and deacons and trustees and elders and others can be so busy doing their tasks, time slips away and they actually forget how long it's been since they thanked the people. And so we set up a special committee of people who identified the givers, who organized the events, who sent out the invitations, who did the follow-up. And they were the ones who assured us that we as leaders would have ample opportunities to be in front of the members to say thank you. That's a great question.
Thank you, Doctor. And maybe a follow-on or a tag on to that, especially interesting was that 3rd item of transparency. And you let us know that you also exercised vulnerability by telling your own story and letting people know some of the things that you were challenged with early on. How do you get the other members of those boards or the organizations to use that same transparency or vulnerability about maybe where they've struggled to help others learn from their own experiences?
Yes, it's very hard. It's very hard because religion generally has a kind of schizophrenia in that on the one hand, we recognize our flaws and our needs, which is what attracts us to religious practice and divine power. But on the other hand, when we gather, there's a kind of social, cultural pressure to look like you've got it all together. No one wants to come looking raggedy and sounding raggedy and looking down and out. And so there's this schizophrenia that we have in Western religion and Western culture, and it starts with leadership. And all I can say is that starting with in my tradition, again, the pastor, and then spreading out throughout other leaders, it's important for people to recognize the challenges and struggles that exist in every sector of an organization, to motivate and inspire people to know that if I or they can overcome their specific barriers, then so can you.
Yeah, I think that's great advice, and I agree with you. Having people become vulnerable is a tough thing to let them know that that's okay, right? But so many great relationships and connections are formed, and that can have such a powerful impact on other people when they're willing to be vulnerable and share their own challenges. We've got a couple of questions here that really kind of circle around the same topic, and that is perhaps a group, a congregation, a parish, et cetera, that's maybe composed primarily of retirees or people living on a fixed income. And how would you work with that situation to improve giving from that type of a group?
Well, what I didn't say, and which could take up another presentation, is that not all giving is financial. And we had, for instance, a significant number of people over 65 in our congregation. At least 25% of our congregation was over 65. They can give time, they can give service, they can give advice, they can give encouragement. And so that's the first thing, that people on limited means or fixed income have to feel that their contribution can be as significant as a financial contribution if they had it. That's number one. And then number two, I think the elderly can be very helpful in helping us expand the number of givers, whether you're talking about church growth, evangelism, whether you're talking about outreach. The fact of the matter is that the older people in the church, and the older people in the synagogue, and the older people in the mosque, the older people in whatever tradition we're in, are really the best salespeople for the tradition itself. And we've got to deploy them and empower them to be a part of the new member process, to be a part of outreach, because it's their testimonies that can help encourage people to become a part of our tradition. But then finally, let me also close with this. Many of the older people in our church were sitting on a lot of money. Just because they were elderly didn't mean they were broke. And it was just a matter of whether or not they were willing or able to give some of the money that they had. But we had large gifts given by people of meager means because their hearts were in the work.
Thank you, Doctor. Again, great advice there. And it looks like people from the questions, people really want to dial into a little bit more detail too on some of these, the things that you did with members to help them with their own personal finances. I thought that was a really interesting insight of, as you help the individuals with their individual finances, that the finances of your church and congregation improved overall. Were there particular programs that you utilized, something that was put together by a third party, or was this all your own invention or the invention of folks in your church?
Well, I started using other people's content, and there's no shortage of content available for any type of person with any type of background in any tradition to learn about money. And I think the general consensus in our country is that financial literacy is a great need across the board, across ethnic boards, across age and income boards. The problem with financial literacy and the problem we had using other people's material, we used FDIC material, we tried to use some commercial materials, but they cost too much money. We used some Christian materials that we found they were a little too religious and not as practical as we needed. But very few, if any, of the materials did three things. Number one, they were not as culturally relevant and specific for our community as we needed them to be. Because when you look at spending, when you consider consumerism today, consumerism in large measure is driven by culture. And marketers and advertisers capitalize on cultural symbols and messages to lure us into our financial habits. And so that's number one. The second was that they did not focus on behavior. Most financial programs focus on information. Well, in my 20s, when I became a licensed minister, I shouldn't really say this in front of such a sophisticated crowd, but when I became a licensed minister, the first step in the Baptist church is you get a license and then you get ordained. And when I got licensed and I was on my way to ministry, I owned a Chevrolet. It was paid for. And when I became a minister, I traded in my fully paid for Chevrolet and I traded in for a Cadillac that cost me so much money that the loan payments were half my check every month. And it was irrational. I was intelligent. I was financially literate, but I felt like as a minister, I now needed to drive a Cadillac because all the other ministers I knew drove Cadillacs. Forget that they were 20 years older than I was. And so our values, our cultural symbols, the pressure we put on ourselves can cause us to make bad financial decisions, not because we don't know better, but it's feeling. And so we had to put together our own curriculum. I call it D-Free. One of the books that you cited that I wrote was the beginning of that curriculum. We now teach people how to use the curriculum. We offer training for free. We have online classes for free. It all grew out of First Baptist. But we had to put together our own curriculum that was biblically based, culturally relevant, and affordable for people who are struggling and don't have a lot of money to spend on trying to figure out their money. So that's what we did. You can go to my website, dpsawyer.com, or to any of my social media handles and find it. But we had to it was almost like a spiritual Baptist financial cocktail. And we've been using it ever since, and about 5,000 churches around the country use it today.
Well, that is a wonderful outcome from that, and thank you for sharing your wisdom and how you got that all put together. The next question or set of questions is kind of circling again around an interesting topic and maybe a sensitive one, right? My sense is that we probably have a number, if not a majority, of the folks on the webinar are leaders in their congregations and very aware of what's going on in the economy today and how most folks are struggling with the way inflation is going, perhaps also struggling with jobs. So how is it that leaders in churches, congregations, temples, mosques can discuss their own compensation in their organizations while the organization itself and members of the organization may be struggling financially? What's the right way to do that?
Oh my goodness, Guy, that is a major question. It's one that's, I think, significantly challenging for 90 to 95% of the clergy from every tradition in this country. And the question is exacerbated by these high-profile clergy who fly jet airplanes and live in mansions, and they skew the perception of everybody on how clergy live and the realities of being a religious leader. So, listen, I have a whole presentation on this. Maybe I'll come back another time and do it. But I think, in summary, clergy people have got to take seriously the cost of living in their area, the needs of their families, and the capacity of their institution, and have a very serious talk with the leadership of your institution, because most institutions assume that the clergy person that they hire to be in charge is full-time, 24/7, 365 days a week, no matter what. Doesn't matter what the income is, doesn't matter how large the membership is. There's this unspoken expectation, be there when I need you. And when I went to First Baptist, because First Baptist, had an income $4,000 a week, it was just slightly greater than my personal income. And they offered me my compensation package. They said, will you accept this? I said, I'll accept that as long as you know I can't live off of that. And I think what we have to do a better job at in seminary and outside is teaching clergy how to talk to the leaders and the members of their congregation about the realities of their circumstances. And we also, and this is for Duke Divinity leaders, we also have to teach trained clergy what they're qualified to do besides lead a congregation. When you graduate with a seminary degree, you have multiple areas of qualification for teaching and writing and research that can supplement your clergy income, as long as you're not trying to behave as if it's full-time, when in fact, the congregation, the organization cannot afford to pay you full-time.
Great advice again, and yeah, I can see how that would be a touchy subject, one that's difficult maybe for clergy to deal with in their organizations.
And if you can't, because it is touchy, if you can't touch it, find someone who'll touch it for you. Get an accountant, a lawyer, a friend, get a clergy person from across town. Find someone who can be your advocate and help you through that process. I happen not to have felt it was touchy at all, but
I think you've been blessed in that way, Doctor. So,
I hope so.
The next one could be one of those topics that could go on for a while as well. And I'm going to combine two or three things here. So the first question is, how often would you preach on money or giving in a year? And then the two dimensions I'll add to that is, how do you do that without sounding and looking like a prosperity preacher? And how do you do that without having someone in the organization say, all this organization talks about is money?
I love this. I could do this for an hour. In 30 years, I can count the number of sermons that I preached that did not mention money. It could be a eulogy, it could be a wedding, it can be a revival, it can be Communion Sunday. Now, sometimes it's only one line, but I can also tell you that in 30 years, I can't remember more than once or twice preaching an entire sermon on money. Because financial realities, financial stresses are everyday truths. Absenteeism from work is affected primarily by financial stress. Our health challenges, often financial stress, inability to sleep. And so what I have done is I have woven messages, anecdotes, examples, lines about finances in every sermon I preach. And I almost have never preached an entire sermon on money.
Wonderful. Just kind of I'm in awe of kind of how you put this all together, Doctor, and the results that you got through all of the activities that you have described here. Could you tell us how long do you think it took to change the overall culture of giving in your church?
Well, that's a good question. We launched this focus in 2005. And one of the largest and biggest ticket items in our congregation was led by my wife. She led an annual women's retreat, 400 women going to a nice hotel for a weekend, costing $300 or $400. And of course, most of them put their registration fee on their credit cards. And about 3 years in with this focus, my wife came to me and said, "You're killing my retreat." And I said, "Well, why?" She said, "Because these women aren't using their credit cards, and I need them to use their credit cards to come on the retreat." And it was at that point that I knew that the culture in the congregation was beginning to change, and that the focus was holistic enough to really be impactful.
That's great. Thank you very much. And we're coming up on time here a little bit, so I think we've got time for one or two more questions here. But it seems like there's some folks out there wondering, all right, so this all sounds good, and yet every year we have to put a budget together. So how do we do a church budget when that future revenue is so uncertain? And maybe we're in this transition, right, of going from current state to where we want to be. How do we make up that budget?
Well, you have two budgets. You have a realistic budget and you have an aspirational budget. And your aspirational budget says, we're going to try these new things and we pray that God will bless us to accomplish these new goals. However, if all we have last year is what we had, if all we have next year is what we had last year, then we budget based on what we had last year. If we're trending downward, then we budget with the trend. We as leaders, along with our members, have got to look at reality. And if the only person who sees the reality is the titular head or the board, then we are allowing the gap between what the members know and what the leaders know to be so wide it can destroy the ministry. We then, after doing the budget, we also, because budgets simply offer a financial description of what you plan to do. When you do the budget, the entire organization needs to understand the implications of that budget, that this number of staff people will no longer be available to do X, Y, or Z, or that kind of activity will be possible. That people need to know communications is critical in helping people understand. As long as we are living within this financial reality, then our programs will have to reflect that, because people are also unrealistic. It's no different with citizens. We want nice roads, we want free schools, we want housing for the homeless, we want to go to the moon, but we don't want to pay taxes. And people are no different inside our religious institutions. And if we are not honest with our members, we will kind of paint ourselves into an ecclesiastical corner, and the people will turn on us because they won't know the truth. And so what I want leaders to do is to do aspirational budgets, to do realistic budgets, and to help the people understand the implications of both.
Thank you very much. Another great recommendation for folks to consider in their own organizations. We're going to try to get through one more question here. I know we're coming short on time. We've got about 4 minutes. So there's a number of questions coming in from the audience around more specifics about those 5 nonprofits that your church set up. And we don't have time to go into all of those specific questions, but let me ask this one. How do you think the formation of those nonprofits influenced the giving to the church itself?
The nonprofits grew and the giving went up. Because you see, and that's the fiscal reason for the nonprofits. If my housing corporation had an operating budget of $7.5 million, and my church had an operating budget of $4 million, and if we combined the two, it would give the church members a false sense of prosperity and capacity. And so we kept them separate, not only for the protection of liabilities, but we kept them separate also to protect us from having an inflated view of our own reality.
I love that, and coming from an insurance company, I also love that idea of protecting your congregation from liabilities in that way.
Right.
So
right.
it seems like there was a dual benefit there, right? Both that protection as well as
That's right.
helping folks see how they could continue to contribute to more ministry outside the church in those nonprofits, and also contributing internally to the core ministry of the church.
Right.
Well, Dr. Soares, we've run out of time today. There's still some questions out there. I apologize to those attendees that we weren't able to get to every question, but very much want to thank you for all the time you're able to give us here today, Dr. Soares. Want to thank Duke Divinity again for helping sponsor this along with Church Mutual. So thank you to Dr. Long, who got us kicked off, and to Rich Poirier, our president. I want everyone to know who's on the webinar today that you will get a follow-up email that will be coming, that will have a number of things in it. One is there'll be a link to a survey. We really want to hear from you what you thought of today's session, what you learned from today's session, and there'll even be an opportunity to tell us what other topics might be of interest to you. As you heard Rich and Dr. Long say earlier, really these are meant to provide benefit to all of the folks here that are attending. So the more that we can learn about what's interesting to you and where you could use some help, the better we'll be able to source that content for you. We will be posting a recording of this session on Duke's YouTube channel, as well as Church Mutual's website. And those links will be in the follow-up email as well. So please use those to refresh yourself, and also share those with anyone else that you feel could benefit from this information. So just want to give one more thank you to everyone today. We're going to let you go on time and be very conscious of keeping to the time limits that we have put today. Again, Dr. Soares, thank you so much for giving us your time today. We wish you all the best in the future, and hope things continue to go in a positive direction for you and your congregation.
Thank you, Guy. And anyone who sends me a question at my website, I'll answer it personally.
Thank you very much. Have a wonderful
Thank
day,
you.
everyone.